Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing M by Kim Thúy, and I gave this book a 3 out of 5. Today, my Booktuber Shoutout goes out to Ola Books, who'll link down below. I came across the channel at the end of 2022 when I was looking for horror or books that were thriller genre. She does a mix of your usual reviews, your predictions, your hauls, but again, the focus is a bit on more horror and thriller heavy. So if you want to show her some support, I'll link her channel down below. And as always, before I go into my full book review, I'll always appreciate it if you like my content to please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and leave your comments down below if you have read this book M by Kim Thúy. This book came out in 2020 and the genre is historical fiction, specifically the Vietnam War and Vietnamese diaspora to the rest of the world. The author Kim Thúy, she is Vietnamese Canadian and she was born in 1968 in Saigon, and at the age of 10 she was one of the many people that fled Vietnam on boats, and her family ultimately settled in Quebec in Canada. She has a degree from Montreal in linguistics, law, and translation, and she has worked many jobs since settling in Canada. She has been a seamstress, an interpreter, a lawyer, a restaurant owner, a media personality, a television host, and she currently devotes her life to writing. I came across this book because it was displayed at my library, but she actually has a previous book called Rue, which I think is also about the Vietnamese War and diaspora, which I think has very high reviews as well. A bit about the book. So basically it talks about the Vietnam War and then it spans over several decades, and there's a cast of characters. There's people who are American soldiers, there's local Vietnamese women, and then eventually children who were born with American fathers and Vietnamese women, and also what happened I guess during Vietnam War locally and the impacts of it decades later. This book is such a short read. Like I literally finished this in one sitting, and there's so many characters, and I love it because it just interlinks so many people, and there's also a lot of like history in it. So it would be like the nanny in town or the soldier and the soldier and my or whatever, and each chapter is like really short, like a page and a half, but it interlinks all of them, and it's not always in a linear time fashion either. But it's kind of great to see how all these characters kind of like person A and person B connect, then person B and person C, then person C, then person D. But then later on, person D will link back to person A. And Kim, the author herself, said there is stories that came from personal accounts that she knew, but obviously there's some like fiction mixed into it because it's hard to verify everything that's said. But regardless, like everything that happens in this book is a bit of truth that happened during that time, and it's just like a really heavy book, but I think really important to read. Because I personally didn't know too much about the Vietnam War and its impacts from the Vietnamese side. I've only seen it when I went to Vietnam and I went to the War Museum, and like going to that War Museum, like it was kind of insane. Like I know like obviously a lot of Americans didn't support the Vietnamese War when it happened, and obviously what people did in the past isn't a reflection of the current present day Americans, but I find it that the Vietnamese people are very open and very welcoming to American tourists, because I feel like it would be so easy to harbor a lot of anger or resentment. So yeah, it was really great for me to see this other perspective of the Vietnam War and these personal stories. It's a really great book to read. As this book is set during the Vietnam War and talks about the impacts of war, I mean, there's obviously so many common themes that comes from that, but for me, the two that I really took home from this short novel is the impact of war and how it affects and breaks apart families, and the second one is how we are all more intertwined than we think. Like, it's very seldom that we know our story and we know stories that our family and friends tells us, but they'll only tell us some stories. Like, it's really hard to look back because we don't have the capacity or the time to see how everyone interlinks, and it's just crazy. Like, I don't want to ruin the book because I think the story in the end is really great, but just these two people, how their paths crossed in Vietnam and how they kept crossing outside of Vietnam, in America and Canada, over and over again. And it's just like a really beautiful story, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. One thing I did enjoy about this book is I feel like this is almost like a trailer for a novel. Like, obviously it's in Vietnam and not Korea or Japan, but I feel like there's a potential here for a Pachinko or a Beast of a Little Land, where we cover multi-generational, multi-decade saga of all these characters, and just I wanted more of the stories fleshed out. I want to know more about each character. I want to know more each about their backstory and how they felt about everything. Like, this book is very like, this is what happened, here is a hint, but we're just gonna close off that loop and that's it. And it just left me wanting more, and it was very not satisfying for me. And then the flip side of that, because of the things I didn't like about this book, things I did like is it makes me want to find more Vietnamese historical fiction. And it made me look up, like, after I read the book, about all these things I kind of heard about in like movie tropes and like pop culture. You know, Operation Baby Lift, where they sent all the babies that were products of American soldiers and Vietnamese women, but these babies were left in Vietnam when the American soldier returned to America. So Operation Baby Lift was then they took all these orphans in Vietnam and brought them to America to be adopted by American families. But one thing I didn't know was that the first plane that disembarked from Vietnam to America actually like exploded. So all these babies died. And it also made me want to read about Operation Ranchland, about Agent Orange. Like, this book is kind of like a synopsis of so many things, and there's so much I want to learn, and it's great because it's piqued my curiosity. On Goodreads, this book got an average of 4.12 out of 5, and I think that's very accurate. I agree with it. I just gave it 3 because it left me wanting more, but in a bad way. So bad reviews, which I can agree with, is it's very disjointed, it was too short, characters were introduced and quickly forgotten, and like I said earlier, there was an opportunity for a fleshed out saga, a very great, beautiful novel. I agree with all his reviews, but I also remember reading like another novel last year where it was set kind of like in the war-torn country, that sometimes this writing is meant to be disjointed because the characters themselves are experiencing a very traumatic event, and even their thoughts are not always like rational or logical. So I guess I want to counter that disjointed part, but I can see where these negative reviews are coming from. On the flip side, good reviews on Goodreads where people thought even though it was short, it was very powerful. The writing was like poetry. It's difficult to read, but super important story and a part of our history to read and learn about. And also people really enjoyed the book because when you hear about the Vietnam War, you always hear like the American side of it. It's very seldom you get to hear the Vietnamese side of the Vietnam War. And interestingly enough, in Vietnam, the Vietnam War is called obviously the American War, because why would they wouldn't call it the Vietnam War? So, you know, like, this book gives you a different perspective, which I think is very important when we analyze historical events or any event in your life. Why I think you should read this book. I think you should read it if you're interested in Vietnam War and also Vietnamese diaspora. But because it's such a short, easy read, I think even if you have no interest or no exposure to this time of our history, I think it's important for you to read it to open your worldview and challenge yourself a little bit. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if you ask me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what the book was about, but I'll also remember how it made me feel when I finished it. So this book, at the end of it, it made me feel awful, just because like the heaviness of the Vietnam War and the impact of all the people affected by it. But the positive part of this book is it made me very curious. I want to learn more. The Vietnam War ended in the 70s, so it's not within my lifetime. I was born in the late 80s, but you know, I interact with people who was a product of this war. Like, I have a friend whose mom was one of the boat people that left Vietnam and was a refugee in Hong Kong, and now ultimately it lives in Canada. So, you know, I think it's really important to have exposure to these stories, just because I will interact with people who were impacted by this. Thank you for watching until the end of my review for M by Kim Thúy. If you read this book, I'd love to hear what you thought down below. And if you want to join me next time, I just started a sci-fi novel called Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I'm really excited because he is a winner of a Nobel prize in literature for one of his other books. And I normally don't really like science fiction, or I normally don't read science fiction, not that I don't like it, but I'm very open to exploring a new genre. And I'm also super excited because Reading with Merb said this book was a top 10 book for her. So we'll see how it goes. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.